Julian thought his platinum card and Italian suit gave him the right to rule the first-class cabin. He weaponized safety protocols and comfort to bully Elias, a quiet older man in a hoodie, trying to get him kicked off the plane. Julian thought he was winning. Until the captain stepped out of the cockpit. He didn't just bring a flight plan. He brought a message that would end Julian's career before the plane even took off. Watch the satisfying moment when arrogance meets true power. The snow at O'Hare International Airport did not fall so much as it attacked the glass terminals, driving horizontally against the reinforced panes with a violence that made the warmth inside feel fragile. It was the kind of Tuesday afternoon that ruined schedules and ended careers. The air inside the United Club Lounge was thick with the scent of stale espresso and high-grade anxiety. Elias Thorne sat in a wingback chair in the far corner of the lounge, away from the buffet and the bar. To the casual observer, he was simply an older black man, perhaps a retiree visiting grandchildren, dressed in a gray cashmere hoodie that looked comfortable but unassuming, and a pair of spectacles that had clearly seen better decades. He held a hardcover book in his hands, the spine cracked and white, the title Meditations by Marcus Aurelius faded almost to invisibility. He turned a page with a slow, deliberate movement, his eyes scanning the text but his mind recording the room. He was not just reading. He was listening. 30 feet away, a man in a navy Italian suit was pacing a groove into the carpet. Julian Prescott was 45 years old, though his blood pressure was likely that of a man 20 years his senior. He wore a Bluetooth earpiece like a piece of jewelry, and spoke at a volume that turned private corporate strategy into a public broadcast. "You do not understand, Michael," Julian hissed, stopping to glare at a flight information screen that showed another 20-minute delay. "I do not care about the optics. The merger happens on Monday. If the Thorne Group audits the books before we offload the logistics division, we are dead. Do you hear me? We are dead in the water." Elias did not look up. He merely adjusted his glasses. He knew the logistics division Julian was shouting about. He knew it intimately because his holding company, Thorne Logistics and Aerospace, had finalized the acquisition of Julian's failing tech transport firm 48 hours ago. The ink was dry. The public announcement was scheduled for when Elias landed in New York. Julian Prescott was currently shouting about hiding assets from the very man sitting 30 feet away from him. Julian ended the call and looked around wildly. He needed to charge his laptop. The lounge was packed, every outlet claimed by stranded travelers. His eyes landed on the corner. There was a dual outlet near the floor lamp. One socket was occupied by a vacuum cleaner cord left by a maintenance worker. The other was empty, but blocked by Elias's small battered leather duffel bag. Julian marched over. He didn't ask. He didn't say excuse me. He simply stood over Elias, casting a shadow over the pages of the Roman emperor's philosophy. "Sir," Julian said. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried the sharp metallic edge of someone used to being obeyed by assistants. "You need to move your bag. I have work to do." Elias finished the paragraph he was reading. He placed a bookmark, a simple strip of red ribbon, in the crease and looked up. His eyes were dark, framed by wrinkles that suggested a lifetime of laughter and hard decisions, but right now they were unreadable. "There are other seats near the window," Elias said. His voice was a deep baritone, quiet and steady, like the hum of a cello. "I need the power outlet," Julian snapped, tapping his charger brick against his thigh. "And the window seats have a glare. Move the bag, please." The please was an afterthought, a garnish on a demand. Elias looked at the bag, then back at Julian. He didn't move immediately. He seemed to be weighing something, calculating the cost of engagement versus the peace of submission. "It is a shared space," Elias said gently. Julian laughed, a short, sharp sound devoid of humor. "Look, pal, I'm sure you have all day to sit here and read your... whatever that is. I have a company to run. My time costs about $6,000 an hour. So let's not make this a civil rights movement, okay? Just slide the bag." The racial microaggression hung in the air, sudden and sharp. It wasn't a slur, it was a dismissal. It was the assumption that Elias's time was worthless, that his presence was an obstruction to the real work of the world. Elias looked at Julian's shoes, polished Oxfords slightly scuffed at the toe from nervous tapping. He looked at the Rolex Submariner on Julian's wrist. Then he reached down and slid his bag 3 inches to the left. Thank you, Julian muttered, not sounding thankful at all. He shoved the vacuum cord out of the wall to plug in his own Apple charger, sat in the adjacent chair, and immediately opened his MacBook, turning his back to Elias. Elias watched him for a moment longer. Then he opened his book again. He wasn't angry. He was disappointed. He had hoped the due diligence reports on Julian Prescott's character were exaggerated. They were not.
Understand
The walk to Gate C10 was a trudge through humanity. The delay had compressed the schedule, meaning 3 flights were boarding simultaneously from adjacent gates. The air was hot and smelled of pretzels and damp wool. Sarah Jenkins stood at the podium for Flight 492 to JFK. She was 40 years old, a lead flight attendant who had been flying since before September 11th. She rubbed her temples. Her feet hurt. The weather was closing in, and she knew the window for takeoff was narrowing. If they didn't push back in 40 minutes, the crew would time out, the flight would be canceled, and she would have 200 angry passengers to rebook. She glanced at the manifest. A full flight. First class was fully booked. She scanned the VIP list. There was a note next to seat 1A. Special attention. Board member status. No name was printed on her preliminary sheet, just the code. That usually meant someone from corporate, or a celebrity trying to fly under the radar. She prayed they weren't high maintenance. She just wanted to get home to her kids. Boarding Group 1, first class and active military, Sarah announced into the microphone. The crowd surged. It was always a psychological study. The economy passengers looked on with a mix of envy and resignation, while the priority passengers moved with an air of aggressive entitlement. Julian Prescott was at the front of the pack, phone pressed to his ear again. He was flanked by a young Asian businessman in a sharp suit and an older white woman, Margaret, who was clutching a knitting bag. Elias Thorne joined the line a few feet behind Julian. He moved slower, his gait displaying a slight limp that flared up in the damp winter weather. Julian reached the scanner first. He slapped his boarding pass down, got the green beep, and started to walk through. Then he stopped. He turned around, blocking the narrow lane, his eyes fixing on Elias, who was stepping up to the scanner. Julian held up a hand, stopping Elias. "Excuse me," Julian said, loud enough for the first 10 rows of economy to hear. "Sir, you're in the wrong line. Group 5 is boarding in 20 minutes. Elias paused, his boarding pass hovering inches from the scanner. "I am in the correct line," he said. Julian rolled his eyes and looked at the gate agent, Sarah's colleague, a young man named David who looked overwhelmed. "Check his ticket," Julian commanded. "He's confused. The economy line is backing up because he's standing here." It was the tone of a man who believed he was being helpful. The benevolence of the prejudice was what made it sting. Julian wasn't yelling. He was directing traffic, assuming that a man who looked like Elias, older, black, dressed in a hoodie, could not possibly hold a ticket for the front of the plane. Elias didn't look at Julian. He looked at David, the gate agent. "I believe I am in Group 1, Elias said softly. David looked flustered. He reached for Elias's paper ticket. "Can I just see that for a second, sir?" Julian scoffed. "Unbelievable. This is why boarding takes forever. People don't read the signs." Behind Elias, Margaret, the older woman with the knitting bag, cleared her throat. "Young man," she said to Julian, "why don't you mind your own business? If he's in the wrong line, the machine will tell him." Julian turned to her, flashing a charming, condescending smile. "Just trying to keep things moving, ma'am. Systems work better when everyone follows the rules." David scanned Elias's ticket. The machine didn't beep green. It let out a long, low tone and a red light flashed. Julian threw his hands up. "See? I told you. Group 5. Elias frowned. That was unexpected. He knew who he was. He knew who owned the jet. But the computer apparently did not. David looked at his screen. His eyes went wide. He typed something frantically. The error code wasn't invalid group. The error code was identity verification. Level 7 executive clearance required. David had never seen a Level 7 code. Level 1 was a platinum flyer. Level 7 was mythical. David stammered. "See," Julian said, stepping back toward Elias, invading his personal space. You're holding up the line, Pop. The gate for economy is over there. Go sit down. Elias stood his ground. He didn't shrink. He actually seemed to grow taller. He looked at David. Is there a problem, Agent? David looked from the screen to Elias. He saw the hoodie, the old glasses. Then he looked at the coat again. He swallowed hard. No, sir. No problem. Just a glitch. A system glitch. David forced a smile, bypassing the scanner manually. You're good to go. Welcome aboard. Julian blinked. What? You didn't even check his group. He's cleared, sir, David said, his voice cracking slightly. Please proceed down the jet bridge. Julian shook his head, muttering as he turned away. Unbelievable. Probably a non-rev employee. Using a buddy pass to steal a seat. Elias took his ticket back. He nodded to David. Thank you. As Elias walked past Julian into the jet bridge, Julian leaned in close, his voice a whisper of cold air. Don't think because you scammed a seat you belong up here. Keep quiet, don't ask for extra snacks, and stay out of my way. Elias paused. He turned his head slowly, meeting Julian's gaze. The air pressure in the jet bridge seemed to drop. We are all heading to the same destination, Mr. Prescott, Elias said. Julian recoiled. He hadn't introduced himself. How did this old man know his name? But before he could ask, Elias was walking away, the limp barely noticeable now, moving with the momentum of a freight train. The interior of the Boeing 777 first-class cabin was a sanctuary of beige leather, wood veneer and soft recessed lighting. It was designed to make the wealthy forget they were in a metal tube, hurting through the stratosphere at 500 miles an hour. Sarah, the lead flight attendant, was already in the galley, prepping welcome drinks. She saw Julian enter first. He didn't make eye contact. He threw his Toomey laptop bag into the overhead bin above seat 1B with a violence that shook the plastic casing. Champagne, Julian said without looking at her. And take my coat. Hang it up. But be careful with the lining, it's silk. Good afternoon to you too, sir, Sarah thought, but she smiled professionally. Certainly. Let me get that for you. She took the coat. As she turned, she saw Elias enter. He stopped at seat 1A. The seats in this configuration were open suites, paired together with a privacy divider that was currently down. 1A and 1B were intimate. They shared a console. Elias lifted his battered leather duffel. He looked at the overhead bin. It was largely occupied by Julian's sprawling bag and a duty-free shopping bag. Julian was already seated, texting rapidly. He glanced up. Whoa, Julian said, putting a hand out as if to physically stop Elias. You're not putting that up there. Elias paused, the bag halfway to the bin. Excuse me? It's dirty, Julian said, pointing at the leather. Look at the bottom. It's scuffed. I have a $3,000 bag in there. I don't want your residue rubbing off on it. Put it under the seat. Elias lowered the bag. There is no stowage under these seats during takeoff and landing, he said calmly. You know this. Find another bin then, Julian said, waving his hand toward the back of the cabin. Row 4 looks empty. Go back there. Sarah stepped in. She could feel the tension radiating off seat 1B like heat from pavement. Sir, she said to Elias, her voice soothing. Is there a problem? This gentleman is concerned about the hygiene of my luggage, Elias said. Sarah looked at the bag. It was old, yes. Distressed leather. But it was a vintage saddleback, the kind that cost more than a mortgage payment in the mid-90s. She recognized quality even if Julian didn't. There's plenty of room, Sarah said. She reached up and rearranged Julian's bag, standing it on its side. Julian made a noise of protest, but Sarah was quick. She slid Elias's bag in next to it. Perfectly safe. Julian huffed, pulling a sanitizing wipe from a packet in his pocket. He began to scrub the armrest between him and Elias. He scrubbed the console. He scrubbed the flight controls. Elias sat down. He buckled his belt. He watched the performance art of Julian's cleanliness. You missed a spot, Elias said softly. Julian froze. He looked at Elias, eyes narrowing. Elias pointed to the small patch of leather on the shared console. Right there. Julian scrubbed it furiously. I don't know how you got this seat, he muttered. Lottery winner? Miles? Or did the gate agent just feel sorry for you? Elias didn't answer. He accepted a glass of water from Sarah. Thank you, Sarah. Julian looked up. You know her name? She is wearing a name tag, Elias said. Julian looked at Sarah. I'll take a scotch. Double. Neat. And bring me some napkins. This table is sticky. Sarah's jaw tightened, but she nodded. Right away, sir. As she walked back to the galley, Sarah caught the eye of Margaret in 2A. Margaret rolled her eyes and mimed a gagging motion. Sarah stifled a laugh. At least the rest of the cabin was sane. But she was worried about 1A. The older gentleman seemed nice but passive. She hoped he wouldn't let the jerk in 1B walk all over him. She checked her tablet again. The board member status note was still there for 1A. She looked at Elias. He was just reading a book. He didn't look like a board member. He looked like a retired professor. Maybe the system was glitching. The doors closed. The jet bridge retracted. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom, announcing a further delay on the tarmac due to de-icing. A collective groan went through the plane. For Julian, this was a catastrophe. He opened his laptop. The screen glowed with complex spreadsheets, red and green bars, and a draft of a contract. The header read, Merger Agreement Project Icarus. He pulled out his phone. Sir, Sarah said, walking by. We are pushing back. Phones need to be in airplane mode. I have to make one call, Julian said, not looking at her. It's an emergency. It's a federal regulation, sir. Walk away, stewardess, Julian said, his voice dropping to a low growl. I am a platinum medallion member. I pay your salary. Give me 2 minutes, or I will write a letter to corporate that will have you serving drinks on a Greyhound bus by Friday. Sarah stopped. She took a breath. She looked at Elias. Elias was watching her. He gave her a microscopic nod. A signal. Let him go. I got this. She retreated. It wasn't worth the fight yet. Julian dialed. He hunched over the center console, shielding his mouth with his hand, but in the quiet cabin, his voice carried. Michael, listen to me, he whispered aggressively. I'm looking at the EBITDA projections for Q4. We need to inflate the shipping efficiency numbers. He paused, listening. I don't care if it's true. Julian hissed. The Thorn Group buyout is based on a valuation of shipping volume. If we show a decline in the Atlantic sector, the price drops. Just move the debt to the shell company in Ireland. They won't look there until after the signature. Elias turned a page of his book. The sound was loud in the silence. Julian ignored him. No, listen. The fuel surcharge. We calculated at 12%. Elias spoke. 18. Julian stopped. He looked at the phone, then at Elias. What? Elias didn't look up from Marcus Aurelius. The fuel surcharge for Atlantic shipping lanes in winter. It is 18%, not 12. If you use 12, your valuation will be off by $4 million. And the audit will catch it immediately. Julian stared at him. The phone slipped slightly in his hand. Who? Were you listening to my call? You are shouting, Elias said. And you are wrong. Julian's face turned a shade of crimson that clashed with his suit. He covered the phone microphone. This is confidential corporate data. You are violating an NDA just by listening. Turn around. Put your headphones on. I don't use headphones, Elias said. And hiding debt in Ireland? That is a cliché, Julian. The Thorn Group uses forensic accountants. They check the Irish subsidiaries first. It is the oldest trick in the book. Julian ended the call. He turned his body fully toward Elias. His hands were shaking, not from fear, but from the adrenaline of being challenged by someone he considered a non-entity. Who do you think you are? Julian whispered, his voice trembling with rage. You think because you read the Wall Street Journal in the dentist's waiting room you know how high-level finance works? I know that fraud is not a business strategy, Elias replied. Julian slammed his laptop shut. That's it. I'm not doing this. I am not sitting next to a snooping, eavesdropping. Nobody. He pressed the flight attendant call button. He pressed it again. And again. Ding. 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 Sarah rushed over, fearing a medical emergency. Sir? Julian pointed a manicured finger at Elias. I want him moved. Now. Sarah blinked. Excuse me? He is harassing me, Julian said, his voice rising, gaining confidence as he fell into the role of the victim. He is listening to my private legal calls. He is making me feel uncomfortable. He is aggressive. Elias sat perfectly still. He placed his hands on his lap. Sir, Sarah said, looking at Elias. Did you? I merely corrected his math, Elias said. I don't feel safe. Julian shouted. The magic words. He knew them well. In the modern airline industry, I don't feel safe was a trump card. It bypassed logic and went straight to liability. I am a VIP passenger conducting sensitive business, and this man is creating a hostile environment. I want him moved to economy, or I want him off the plane. Sarah looked at Elias. The cabin was silent. Margaret in 2A was standing up, peering over the seat. This is ridiculous. Margaret shouted. That man has been nothing but polite. You are the one screaming. Sit down, lady. Julian snapped at her. Sarah put her hands up. Gentlemen, please. Lower your voices. The captain is taxiing. We cannot move passengers right now. I am not flying with him, Julian said, his eyes cold and hard. He leaned in toward Sarah. If you don't move him, I will consider this a security breach. I will report that you allowed a passenger to threaten the safety of a first-class customer. Do you know what the FAA does with those reports? They ground the crew pending investigation. You won't fly for months. It was a lie, but a terrifying one. Julian was weaponizing the bureaucracy. He was using the system, a system designed to protect people, to attack a man he simply didn't like. Sarah looked at Elias. She looked trapped. She knew Julian was the aggressor, but she also knew the power of a platinum complaint. Mr. Thorne? She asked, looking at her manifest, testing the name. Yes, Elias said. Would you be willing to move to seat 4A? Just a few rows back. Just to de-escalate? It was a plea. She was asking him to be the bigger man, to sacrifice his dignity to save her career. Elias looked at Sarah. He saw the fear in her eyes. He looked at Julian, who was smiling. A smug, tight little victory smile. Julian thought he had one. He thought power was about noise. He thought authority was about getting your way. Elias closed his book. He unbuckled his seatbelt. For a moment it looked like he was going to stand up and move. Julian's smile widened. But Elias didn't stand. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, and looked deep into Sarah's eyes. Sarah, Elias said. His voice was soft, but it carried a weight that the entire cabin could feel. It was the weight of mountains. Do not ask me to move. I am not the problem here. But Sir, Sarah whispered. He's going to file a report. Let him, Elias said. In fact, I insist on it. He turned to Julian. Call the captain, Julian. Call security. Do it. But I warn you, if you bring authority into this cabin, you must be prepared for whose authority they will recognize. Julian laughed. You think they're going to side with you? Look at you. Look at me. Judge by character, not by appearance, Elias said. Julian scoffed. Character doesn't buy plane tickets. Money does. He turned to Sarah. Get the captain. Tell him we have a security threat in 1A. I want this man removed. Sarah looked at Julian. Then she looked at Elias. Something in Elias's eyes, a calm assurance, a lack of fear, gave her pause. But the training kicked in. A passenger claimed a security threat. She had to act. I will inform the cockpit, Sarah said, her voice shaking. She walked to the interphone. Julian leaned back, crossing his legs. You're done, pal, he whispered to Elias. Enjoy the bus ride back to the terminal. Elias picked up his book. He opened it to his bookmark. We shall see, Elias murmured. The plane braked hard. They weren't taking off. The engine spooled down. The captain's voice came over the intercom, but it wasn't the usual friendly drawl. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Anderson. We have a situation in the forward cabin that requires immediate attention. We are returning to the gate. Police have been notified. The cabin erupted in groans. People checked their watches. Connections would be missed. Meetings would be canceled. Julian looked at Elias and grinned. I told you. You messed with the wrong guy. Elias looked out the window at the swirling snow. He saw the flashing lights of a police cruiser approaching the jet bridge. He didn't look worried. He looked like a man who was waiting for the punchline of a joke he had written himself. On the contrary, Julian, Elias said, turning the page, I think everything is proceeding exactly as it should. The return to the gate was a funeral procession for patience. The Boeing 777, a marvel of engineering designed to conquer continents, was now reduced to a sluggish, lumbering beast crawling at 5 miles per hour across the gray concrete of O'Hare. The hum of the engines was a low, vibrating growl that seemed to resonate in the teeth of every passenger on board. Inside the cabin, the atmosphere had shifted from annoyance to a heavy, suffocating tension. The silence in first class was absolute, broken only by the rhythmic thud of the nose gear rolling over the expansion joints of the tarmac. Julian Prescott sat with his arms crossed, staring straight ahead at the seatback screen, which was currently displaying the flight path map. The little airplane icon had spun around and was tracing a line back to the terminal. To him, this line was a victory lap. He checked his watch. He calculated the delay. Maybe an hour to get the old man off, file the report, and get back in the air. He would miss his dinner reservation in Manhattan, but the story he would tell at the board meeting tomorrow would be worth it. He had asserted dominance. He had protected the sanctity of the executive space. He glanced sideways. Elias Thorne had not moved. The older man was still reading his book, his finger tracing a line of text as if he were sitting in a library, not inside a metal tube surrounded by hostile machinery and police sirens. This calm infuriated Julian. It felt like insolence. It felt like the man didn't understand the gravity of the situation, didn't understand that Julian Prescott held the lightning bolt of corporate retribution in his hand. You are quiet now, Julian whispered, leaning slightly over the armrest. Reality setting in? Elias turned a page. The paper made a crisp sound. I am simply enjoying the last few moments of peace, Elias replied without looking up. Before the noise begins. Julian scoffed. Oh, there will be noise. When the Port Authority hauls you off for threatening a flight crew, there will be plenty of noise. You know, I almost feel bad for you. You probably saved up for years for this ticket. And now? You'll be lucky if you ever fly Greyhound again. Elias closed the book gently. He placed it on his lap and finally turned his head to look at Julian. His expression was not angry. It was not fearful. It was filled with a profound, almost clinical curiosity. Tell me, Julian, Elias said. When you look at me, what do you see? Julian blinked. He hadn't expected a philosophical question. I see a disruption. I see someone who doesn't understand the rules of the environment he has stumbled into. Elias nodded slowly. You see a disruption. You see a hoodie. You see age. You see skin color. And because of these things, you assume I am powerless. You assume I am here on charity or luck or fraud. I assume you are in over your head, Julian corrected, his voice dripping with condescension. And that is your fatal flaw, Elias said softly. You mistake presence for power. You mistake noise for authority. You are so busy projecting your own importance that you have failed to gather the most basic data about your surroundings. Julian laughed, shaking his head. You talk a good game, Pop. But look out the window. That's the police. They aren't here for a philosophy lecture. They are here because I called them. The plane shuddered to a halt. The chime sounded, that innocuous double-tone ding that usually signaled the freedom to move about the cabin. Today it sounded like a gavel. The captain's voice came over the intercom again. Flight attendants, disarm doors for arrival. Please remain seated. Police are boarding the aircraft. Sarah, the lead flight attendant, stood by the forward galley door 1L. Her hands were trembling slightly. She had been flying for 20 years. She had handled drunk passengers, medical emergencies, and severe turbulence. But this felt different. This felt wrong. She looked at Elias, who was sitting with his hands folded on his lap, looking for all the world like a man waiting for Sunday service to begin. Then she looked at Julian, who was preening, adjusting his tie, checking his reflection in the dark window. She knew Julian was the aggressor. Every instinct she had screamed it. But she was trapped by the rigid geometry of airline protocol. A passenger had claimed a threat. The threat had to be neutralized. The investigation would happen later on the ground, after the damage was done. The jet bridge motor whirred. and the heavy thud of the connector hitting the fuselage echoed through the cabin. Margaret, the older woman in seat 2A, leaned forward. She tapped Julian on the shoulder. "You are a terrible human being," she hissed. Julian didn't even turn around. "Save it, Grandma. You can give your statement to the cops if you want to waste your night." The cabin door opened with a rush of cold air and the smell of jet fuel. 2 Port Authority police officers stepped onto the plane. They were large men wearing heavy tactical vests, their faces set in masks of professional neutrality. Behind them was a man in a pilot's uniform, but it wasn't the first officer. It was Captain Anderson, the pilot in command. Anderson was a man of 50, with silver hair cut in a military fade and 4 gold stripes on his epaulets. He held his cap in one hand and a digital tablet in the other. His face was grim. Julian unbuckled his seatbelt and stood up immediately. "Officers, Captain, over here," Julian said, waving his hand as if hailing a taxi. "I am the one who made the complaint. Julian Prescott. Platinum medallion." "Sit down, sir," the first officer said. His voice was flat, brokering no argument. Julian hesitated, then sat back down, smoothing his suit jacket. "Of course. Safety first. The individual is right here. Seat 1A. He has been aggressive, he has been recording my private business conversations, and he made a verbal threat against the safety of the flight when I asked him to stop." Julian pointed a finger at Elias. It was a theatrical gesture, designed to isolate the target. Elias did not move. He did not speak. He merely watched Captain Anderson. Captain Anderson stepped past the police officers. He walked into the first-class cabin. He didn't look at the police. He didn't look at Julian. He looked straight at Elias. The cabin held its breath. The young Asian businessman in 2B had stopped typing. Sarah was pressing her back against the galley wall, her eyes wide. Julian smirked. He was waiting for the words. "Sir, grab your bag. You're coming with us." Captain Anderson stopped directly in front of row 1. He looked at the tablet in his hand, then he looked at Elias. The captain's posture changed. The rigidity left his shoulders. He didn't look like a man confronting a threat. He looked like a man reporting for duty. Captain Anderson bowed his head slightly. A gesture of respect, not submission. "Mr. Thorne," the captain said. His voice was clear, audible to the first 3 rows. "I received the ACARS transmission from headquarters 3 minutes ago. I apologize deeply for the delay and for the disturbance in your cabin." The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush a diamond. Julian's smirk froze. It didn't disappear. It just stopped working like a video buffered on a bad connection. His brain processed the words, but they didn't make sense. "Mr. Thorne? Disturbance? Apologize? Excuse me?" Julian said, his voice cracking. "Captain, I think you're confused. This man is the disturbance. I am the complainant. I demanded he be removed." Captain Anderson turned slowly to face Julian. The warmth vanished from his eyes. He looked at Julian not as a passenger, but as a liability. "I am aware of your demand, Mr. Prescott," the captain said coldly. "And I am aware of your claim that you felt unsafe." "Exactly," Julian said, rallying. "He threatened me." "Did he?" Captain Anderson asked. Well, he implied it," Julian stammered. "He was hostile. And look at him. He doesn't belong here." Elias finally spoke. He spoke to the captain, ignoring Julian entirely. "Captain Anderson," Elias said. His voice was calm, authoritative, the voice of a man who owned the building, not just the room. "Is the merger paperwork finalized?" "Yes, sir," Anderson replied. "The legal department confirmed the digital signatures while we were taxiing. The ownership transfer of the airline initiated at 12 p.m. Eastern. Technically, as of 40 minutes ago, you are the chairman of the board." Julian Prescott stopped breathing. The air in his lungs turned to lead. "Chairman?" Julian whispered. Elias unbuckled his seatbelt. He stood up. He wasn't a tall man, but in that moment he seemed to fill the entire fuselage. He adjusted his gray hoodie, brushing a speck of imaginary dust from the sleeve. He turned to Julian. "Mr. Prescott," Elias said. "You asked who I was. You asked if I knew how high-level finance works." Julian opened his mouth, but no sound came out. "I am Elias Thorne," Elias continued, "founder of Thorne Logistics. And as of this afternoon, the majority shareholder of this airline." The color drained from Julian's face so fast it looked like a physical effect. His hands, resting on his knees, began to shake uncontrollably. No, Julian breathed. That's impossible. Thorn Logistics is a shipping company. You're buying my company. You're buying Sterling Tech. I was buying Sterling Tech, Elias corrected. Past tense. Julian's eyes widened. Was? Elias reached into his pocket. The police officers tensed, their hands hovering near their belts. But Elias only pulled out a pair of reading glasses and a small folded piece of paper. I was conducting a final due diligence check, Elias said. I wanted to see how the executive team of Sterling Tech operates in the wild. Character is not revealed in the boardroom, Mr. Prescott. It is revealed in the waiting room. It is revealed in how you treat the people who can do nothing for you. Elias unfolded the paper. I heard your phone call, Julian. You were discussing Project Icarus. Julian flinched as if struck. You told your associate to hide debt in the Irish subsidiary, Elias said, his voice raising slightly, projecting to the silent audience of the cabin. You discussed inflating the fuel surcharge valuation to 18% to mask the declining shipping volume in the Atlantic sector. A gasp rippled through the cabin. The businessman in 2B whispered, "Oh my God. That is fraud," Julian, Elias said. But that wasn't what convinced me to cancel the deal. Elias looked at the iPad the captain was holding. He tapped the screen. It was this, Elias said. The file you were working on. The one you were so afraid I would see. You called it a merger agreement. But the file name on your screen was Reduction in Force Phase 1. Julian looked at his laptop bag, lying innocently in the overhead bin. Elias looked at the passengers. He looked at Sarah. He wasn't planning a merger, Elias told the cabin. He was planning a liquidation. The deal he was trying to sign with my company included a provision to lay off 40% of his workforce immediately after signing. He was going to fire 2,000 people to boost the stock price for his own exit bonus. Margaret in 2A gasped. You monster. Julian stood up, his face wild. That's proprietary information. You can't share that. That's illegal. You are on my plane, Julian. Elias's voice cracked like a whip. For the first time, the anger was visible. It wasn't the petty anger of an insulted man. It was the righteous fury of a leader who despised cowardice. You invoked the safety protocols of this vessel to bully a flight attendant. You wasted the time of 200 people. You lied to federal officers about a security threat. And you did it all while planning to destroy the livelihoods of 2,000 families. Elias turned to the police officers. Officers, Elias said calmly. I believe making a false report regarding the safety of a commercial aircraft is a federal crime? One of the officers nodded grimly. Yes, sir. 49 U.S. Code Section 46507. False information and threats. It's a felony. Elias looked at Julian. I am not kicking you off this plane because I don't like you, Julian. I am kicking you off because you are a security risk. A man who lies to the police to soothe his own ego is a danger to everyone around him. Julian looked around the cabin. He looked for an ally. He looked at the businessman in 2B. The man looked away. He looked at Margaret. She was glaring at him with pure hatred. He looked at Sarah. Sarah was standing straight, her head high. She wasn't afraid anymore. Mr. Prescott, Captain Anderson said, his voice hard. Grab your bag. Julian stammered. Captain, please. This is a misunderstanding. I didn't know who he was. If I knew he was Mr. Thorn. That, Elias interrupted, is exactly the point. Elias stepped closer to Julian. He was inches away. If you had treated me with basic human decency when you thought I was a nobody, we would be having a drink right now. We would be discussing your future. But because you thought I was weak, you showed me exactly who you are. Elias pointed to the door. Get off my plane. Julian stood there for a moment, his world collapsing. The silence in the cabin was deafening. He looked at his platinum card in his mind, the symbol of his status, and realized it was just a piece of plastic. He reached up and grabbed his bag. His movements were jerky, uncoordinated. He grabbed his coat. He stepped into the aisle. One of the police officers took his arm. Let's go, sir. Julian Prescott began the longest walk of his life. The first-class cabin was only 20 feet long, but it felt like miles. As he passed row 2, Margaret spoke loud and clear. Don't let the door hit you, dear. As he passed row 3, the young businessman held up his phone. He was recording. Say hi to the internet, he said. Julian kept his head down, but there was nowhere to hide. He walked past the galley. He walked past Sarah. He paused for a second looking at her. He opened his mouth, perhaps to threaten her again, perhaps to beg. Sarah didn't flinch. Bye-bye now, she said sweetly. Julian was led off the jet bridge. The heavy door swung shut behind him with a finality that felt like a prison cell closing. The cabin remained silent for 3 seconds. Then Margaret started to clap. It wasn't a raucous cheer. It was a slow, steady applause. The businessman joined in. Then the people in row 3. Then the economy passengers, who had no idea what was happening but knew that the jerk in 1B was gone, started clapping too. Elias did not bow. He did not smile triumphantly. He looked tired. He sat back down in seat 1A. Captain Anderson stood at the front of the cabin. He raised a hand and the applause died down. Ladies and gentlemen, the captain said, we apologize for the delay. We have removed the security risk. We will be pushing back in 5 minutes. We appreciate your patience. He turned to Elias. Mr. Chairman, do you need anything else? Elias looked at Sarah. She was standing there, looking at him with a mixture of awe and residual shock. Ms. Jenkins, Elias said. Yes, Mr. Thorne? Sarah replied. Elias gestured to the empty seat next to him. Seat 1B. This seat is now vacant, Elias said. I believe there is a young soldier in seat 34C. I saw him in the boarding area. He looked like he was heading home for leave. Sarah smiled. She knew exactly who he was talking about. Yes, sir. Corporal Miller. Please upgrade him to seat 1B, Elias said. And Sarah? Yes, sir. The policy regarding customer intimidation of the crew. We are going to rewrite it on Monday. No one should have to endure what you just did just because a passenger has a shiny card. Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. Thank you, sir. Elias picked up his book. He opened it to the bookmark. He adjusted his glasses. Let's go to New York, Elias said. The flight to JFK was smooth. The young Corporal Miller, a 19-year-old kid from Ohio who had never sat in first class in his life, spent the first hour staring at the legroom in disbelief. He looked at Elias. Sir, the corporal said tentatively. The flight attendant said you're the one who upgraded me. I don't know how to thank you. Elias smiled. It was the first genuine smile he had shown since the lounge. You don't need to thank me, son, Elias said. You earned this seat with your service. The man who was sitting here before? He thought the seat made the man. You know better. The man makes the seat. Corporal Miller nodded, though he didn't fully understand the backstory. He just knew the old guy in the hoodie was cool. So what do you do, sir? The corporal asked, cutting into his steak. Me? Elias chuckled. He looked out the window at the clouds below, bathed in the golden light of the setting sun. I'm in waste management, Elias said. The corporal looked confused. Waste management? Like garbage trucks? Elias thought about Julian Prescott. He thought about the toxic culture of Sterling Tech. He thought about the clean slate awaiting the company on Monday. Something like that, Elias said. I clean up messes. As the plane began its descent into New York, the lights of the city glittered like diamonds scattered on black velvet. Elias closed his book. Marcus Aurelius had written about the transient nature of fame and power. Look at the emptiness of the applause, the emperor had written. The fickleness of the crowd. Elias knew the crowd on the internet would tear Julian apart by morning. The video from the businessman in 2B was likely already trending. The board of Sterling Tech would see the news before Julian even got out of police custody. The merger was dead. Julian's career was dead. But that wasn't what mattered to Elias. He watched Sarah walking down the aisle, collecting empty glasses. She walked differently now. Her shoulders were back. She moved with a lightness that hadn't been there before. She wasn't just a server in the sky anymore. She was a protected member of a team. That was the real justice. Not the punishment of the wicked, but the empowerment of the good. The wheels touched down at JFK with a gentle bump. The reverse thrusters roared, slowing the massive machine. Elias Thorne, the silent chairman, unbuckled his seatbelt. He picked up his battered leather bag, the one Julian had called dirty. He slung it over his shoulder. He stood up, ready to get to work. The video clip was only 42 seconds long, but by Sunday morning it had been viewed 12 million times. It was shaky footage, filmed vertically by the young businessman in seat 2B. It captured the exact moment Julian Prescott stood in the aisle, his face a mask of crumbling arrogance, while Captain Anderson pointed to the door. The caption was simple. CEO tries to kick old man off plane. Finds out old man owns the airline. The internet did not just watch, it judged. In the digital age, justice is not a gavel. It is a trending topic. By the time Elias Thorne woke up in his suite at the St. Regis in Manhattan on Monday morning, Julian Prescott was trending higher than the Super Bowl. The hashtag Seat 1A was filled with stories of people who had been bullied by entitled executives. Elias sat by the window sipping black coffee, looking out at the gray skyline of New York City. His phone was buzzing on the table. It was his legal team. It was the PR department of the airline. It was the board of Sterling Tech. He ignored them all. He was reading the comments on the video. I worked for Sterling Tech for 3 years. Julian fired me because I took a week off for my dad's funeral. Karma is a slow driver, but she never misses an exit. Look at the flight attendant. She's terrified. That's what toxic power looks like. Elias set the phone down. The viral fame meant nothing to him. It was noise. What mattered was what happened in the next 2 hours. Today was Monday. Today was the day Project Icarus was supposed to launch. He stood up and put on his suit. Not a hoodie today. Today he wore a bespoke 3-piece charcoal suit, the fabric dark and serious. He tied a silk tie with a dimple that would have made a tailor weep. He looked in the mirror. He didn't see a hero. He saw a janitor preparing to clean up a very large, very expensive mess. The headquarters of Sterling Tech was a glass monolith in the financial district, a building designed to intimidate. On the 40th floor, in a conference room that cost more than most elementary schools, panic was the primary decor. Michael Vance, the CFO of Sterling Tech and Julian's right-hand man, was sweating through his shirt. He was pacing the length of the mahogany table, shouting at a speakerphone. I don't care that he's in police custody, Michael yelled. Get him on the line. The stock is down 14% in pre-market trading. The Thorne Group is ghosting us. The other board members sat in stunned silence. They were a collection of men and women who had spent their careers insulated from consequences. They viewed the world through spreadsheets and quarterly projections. But the video had punctured their bubble. We need to issue a statement, said Linda, the VP of HR. We need to say Julian's behavior was a personal failing, not a reflection of company values. Company values? Michael laughed hysterically. Linda, we were about to fire 2,000 people today. Those are our values. Ruthlessness. Efficiency. That's what Julian was selling. The heavy oak doors swung open. The room went silent. It wasn't Julian. Elias Thorne walked in. He didn't have an entourage. No lawyers. No assistants. Just him, carrying the same battered leather bag from the plane. He walked to the head of the table, Julian's seat. He didn't sit down. He placed the bag on the table with a heavy thud. Good morning, Elias said. His voice was low, filling the acoustic perfection of the room. Michael Vance stopped pacing. He looked at Elias, then at the empty chair. Mr. Thorne, Michael stammered, putting on his best negotiating face. We weren't expecting you until noon. We understand there was an unfortunate incident on your flight. We want to assure you that Julian's behavior. Sit down, Michael, Elias said. It wasn't a request. Michael sat. Elias looked around the table. He made eye contact with every single person. He saw fear. He saw greed. He saw the desperate calculation of people trying to figure out if they could still get their bonuses. I watched the news this morning, Elias began. The pundits are calling this a PR disaster. They are saying Sterling Tech has a branding problem. He unzipped his leather bag. He pulled out a stack of files, blue folders, not the glossy digital presentations they were used to. They are wrong, Elias said. You don't have a branding problem. You have a cancer. He slid a folder toward Linda. Linda, Elias said. Last year, you authorized the termination of 40 employees who were on medical leave. You saved the company $2 million. You received a bonus of $100,000. Linda went pale. That That was a restructuring decision. It was legal. Legal, yes, Elias said. Moral? No. He slid a folder toward Michael. Michael, you and Julian created Project Icarus. You engineered a plan to inflate shipping valuations by manipulating fuel surcharges, hiding debt in Dublin, and then slashing 40% of the workforce immediately after my acquisition check cleared. Michael's mouth opened and closed like a fish. How do you have those files? I read them, Elias said simply. Julian was working on them next to me for 3 hours. He is not very careful with his screen brightness. Elias placed his hands on the table. The room was silent. The air conditioning hummed, sounding like a countdown. I built Thorn Logistics on a simple principle, Elias said. A company is not its stock price. A company is its people. The drivers. The warehouse workers. The coders. The receptionists. They are the engine. You are just the hood ornament. And hood ornaments can be replaced. Michael stood up, his face red. Now wait a minute. You can't just come in here and lecture us. We have a signed letter of intent. If you back out of this deal now, the penalty clauses. There is no deal, Elias interrupted. Michael froze. I am triggering the material adverse change clause, Elias said calmly. Section 14, paragraph B. Criminal conduct by executive leadership that materially damages the reputation of the entity. He pointed to the large screen on the wall, which was muted but showing CNN. The headline read, Airline CEO praised for standing up to bully. Julian Prescott was arrested for federal crimes yesterday, Elias said. He falsely reported a security threat. He interfered with a flight crew. That is criminal conduct. The deal is void. The room erupted. You can't do that. Michael shouted. The company will collapse. If you walk away, the stock goes to zero. We'll be bankrupt by Friday. Elias nodded. Yes, you will be. He watched the realization wash over them. The terror of bankruptcy. The loss of their options. The end of their country club memberships. However, Elias said, raising a finger. The room fell silent again. Desperation is a powerful silencer. I am not interested in buying Sterling Tech anymore, Elias said. The brand is toxic. The leadership is corrupt. He paused, letting the words sink in. But I am interested in the assets. I am interested in the proprietary tracking software. And most importantly, I am interested in the 2,000 employees who actually do the work. He reached into his bag and pulled out a single thin document. This is a new offer, Elias said. It is an asset purchase agreement. I will buy the infrastructure and the payroll of Sterling Tech. I will absorb every single employee into Thorn Logistics. No laughs. No liquidation. Michael snatched the document. He scanned the numbers. His eyes bulged. This price, Michael choked out. It's pennies on the dollar. It barely covers the debt. There's nothing left for the shareholders. There's nothing left for the board. Correct, Elias said. He looked at Michael with eyes as cold as the Atlantic. This deal saves the jobs of your workers. Keeps the lights on. Protects the pensions. But it leaves you, the executive board, with nothing. Your stock options? Worthless. Your golden parachutes? Gone. Elias leaned forward. You have two choices. Option A, I walk away. You go bankrupt. You spend the next 5 years being sued by shareholders and investigated by the SEC for the fraud Julian committed. Option B. You sign this, resign immediately, and walk away with your freedom, if not your fortune. Michael looked at the other board members. They were terrified. They knew about the fraud. They knew that if the SEC looked too closely, they might end up in a cell next to Julian. Elias checked his watch. It was a cheap Timex worn on the inside of his wrist. You have 10 minutes, Elias said. I have a lunch meeting with a flight attendant who needs a promotion. The cafeteria at Sterling Tech was usually a place of quiet despair on Mondays, but today the atmosphere was electric with anxiety. Rumors were flying. Julian arrested. The deal dead. Layoffs imminent. Sarah Jenkins walked into the building lobby. She wasn't wearing her uniform. She was wearing a simple dress, looking around the massive atrium with wide eyes. She had been summoned here by a text message from an unknown number. Please meet me at Sterling Tech HQ. 12 p.m. 80. She approached the security desk. I'm here to see Mr. Thorn. Sarah said tentatively. The security guard, a burly man who looked like he'd seen everything, looked at his list. He looked up at Sarah. He smiled. Go right up, ma'am. 40th floor. The elevator is waiting. When the elevator doors opened, Sarah didn't find a boardroom. She found a hallway filled with people in expensive suits carrying boxes. It was a procession of the defeated. Executives were clearing out their desks. She saw a man who looked like the one on the news, Julian's partner, arguing with security as he was escorted out. Sarah walked to the end of the hall. The double doors were open. Elias was sitting at the head of the table, alone. The room was empty of people but filled with the ghosts of a hostile takeover. Sarah, Elias said, standing up. He smiled, that warm, grandfatherly smile she remembered from the cabin. Thank you for coming. Mr. Thorne, Sarah said. I saw the news. About Julian. Elias waved his hand. Julian is history. Let's talk about the future. He gestured for her to sit. How is the crew? Elias asked. They're shaking, Sarah admitted. But good. Captain Anderson bought everyone drinks last night. We thought we were going to be fired. Usually when a platinum member complains, the crew takes the fall. Not anymore, Elias said. He pushed a folder across the table toward her. I spent the morning drafting a new corporate policy for the airline, Elias said. We are calling it the Dignity Protocol. Sarah opened the folder. Clause 1. The judgment of the flight crew regarding safety and harassment is final and supersedes passenger status. Clause 2. Any passenger found verbally abusing crew or fellow passengers will face a lifetime ban across the entire Thorne transport network. Clause 3. A dedicated legal defense fund will be established for any employee sued by a passenger while performing their duties. Sarah read the words. Her vision blurred slightly. This wasn't just policy. This was protection. It was validation. This is amazing, Sarah whispered. There is one more thing, Elias said. He leaned back in the chair. I need a director of customer experience for the airline. Someone who understands that experience isn't about champagne and hot towels. It's about human connection. It's about sensing conflict before it starts. It's about protecting the vulnerable. Sarah looked up. You want me? Elias nodded. You stood between a billionaire bully and an old man in a hoodie. You tried to de-escalate. You kept your cool. And when the time came, you told the truth. That is leadership, Sarah. But I'm just a flight attendant, Sarah said. I don't have an MBA. Elias laughed. A rich, deep sound. Julian Prescott had an MBA from Wharton, Sarah. Look where that got him. I don't need degrees. I need character. He stood up and extended his hand. The job pays double your current salary. And you get to write the training manual. Will you help me fix this airline? Sarah stood up. She shook his hand. It was rough, warm, and solid. Yes, sir, she said. I will. 3 months later. The departure lounge at JFK was buzzing. It was the start of the summer rush. At Gate 42 a line was forming. But something was different. The signage had changed. The priority lane was still there, but next to it was a new sign. Family and Assistance Lane. A young gate agent was handling the podium. A man in a suit, looking impatient, tapped his watch. Hey, I'm Diamond Status. Can I cut in front of this wheelchair? The gate agent pointed to the sign on the wall behind him. It was a plaque, small but distinct. It read, In this airline, kindness is the highest status. Sir, the agent said firmly but politely. We board those needing assistance first. Please wait your turn. The man in the suit huffed, but he didn't argue. He looked around. The atmosphere had shifted. The crew looked more confident. The passengers seemed less on edge. In the back of the terminal, watching from the window of the airline club, Elias Thorne sipped his tea. He wasn't wearing a suit today. He was back in his gray hoodie. He liked it. It was comfortable. He watched a plane push back from the gate. The tail fin bore the new logo of the airline. A simple stylized shield. His phone buzzed. It was an email from the new VP of Operations at the Logistics Division, formerly the lower-level manager at Sterling Tech who had secretly leaked the data about Project Icarus to the press. Subject: Q2 report. Mr. Thorne, the integration is complete. No jobs lost. Efficiency is actually up 15% now that the staff isn't terrified of being fired. Also, we found the hidden debt in the Dublin account. It's been settled. Thank you. Elias smiled. He picked up his book. He had finished Meditations. Now he was reading To Kill a Mockingbird. Excuse me? Elias looked up. A young woman was standing there. She looked exhausted. She was holding a crying baby in one arm and dragging a heavy stroller with the other. Are you using that outlet? She asked, pointing to the plug next to Elias's chair. My phone is dead and I need to call my husband to pick us up. Elias looked at the outlet. His phone was plugged in. It was fully charged. He didn't hesitate. He unplugged his cord. He stood up. Here, Elias said. Take the chair too. It's more comfortable for the baby. Oh no, I couldn't, the woman said. Please, Elias insisted, moving his bag. I've been sitting all day. The woman sat down, relief washing over her face. She plugged in her phone. Thank you so much. You're a lifesaver. She looked at him. He was just an old black man in a hoodie. She didn't know he owned the building. She didn't know he had saved 2,000 jobs that morning. She didn't know he had destroyed a tyrant with a sentence. To her, he was just a kind stranger. And to Elias, that was enough. He picked up his bag and walked toward the exit, disappearing into the crowd of travelers, just another passenger on the journey. Julian Prescott stood in the rain outside a federal courthouse in Lower Manhattan. The paparazzi had thinned out. He wasn't headline news anymore. He was yesterday's villain. His lawyer, a man who charged by the minute and looked bored, handed him an umbrella. The plea deal is the best we can do, Julian, the lawyer said. 2 years probation, 100,000 in fines, and a permanent ban from serving as an officer of a public company. Julian stared at the wet pavement. And the flight ban? Lifetime, the lawyer said. You're on the no-fly list for every major carrier. You want to go to London? Take a boat. Julian watched a black sedan pull up to the curb. It wasn't his driver. He couldn't afford a driver anymore. It was an Uber. He got in. The car smelled of pine air freshener and damp upholstery. The driver, a cheerful man with a thick accent, looked in the rearview mirror. Heading to the airport? The driver asked. No, Julian said quietly. Train station. The driver nodded. Bad weather for flying anyway. I saw on the news some rich guy tried to fire everyone at a tech company, but the owner stopped him. Crazy world, huh? Karma comes for everyone. Julian didn't answer. He looked out the window at the towering skyline of the city he used to think he owned. He saw a billboard for Thorn Airlines. The slogan was new. Rise with respect. Julian closed his eyes. The car merged into traffic, moving slowly, stuck in the endless gridlock of ordinary people living ordinary lives. He was one of them now. And the silence in the back of the Uber was heavier than any he had ever imposed on a first-class cabin. He had demanded silence. He had demanded space. Now he had all the silence in the world, and nowhere left to go.